You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob, it's
This is Inside the Village for the week of August 16th, 2023, with Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief here at Village Media. Derek Turner, the incomparable, the one and only, has returned.
Mr. Vacation.
The prodigal child has returned from 2 weeks off.
My chair seems more comfortable. My microphone is set up nice.
Oh, it was nice. We walked in. Everything was set up.
Yeah, pretty nice.
The band is back together again.
It's really hot in here today, too. I'm wondering if it's because Derek's here. I don't know.
Maybe if he could fix the HVAC, he'd really reach heroic status. Anyway, good to have Derek back.
Yeah,
I'm Scott Sexsmith. Okay, well, it's official. We have been unfriended by Facebook.
Yes, face blocked, as I like to say.
I love that.
Face blocked, yeah. It's official. It all kind of came together last week and this week. If you haven't lost your access to Sioux Today and every other Canadian news outlet, or not Sioux Today, any Village site or any other Canadian news outlet, it's coming. But I'm pretty sure it's everybody now. I don't know anyone in Canada who can still access Canadian journalism on their Facebook feed. We can't say we didn't see this coming.
Nope.
We saw this coming for a long time. Bill C-18 was not something that the folks here at Village Media thought was a great idea. We weren't on board with this. We didn't believe the prevailing wisdom behind it, that Facebook steals our content. We've always worked with the big tech companies in order to make sure that as many people as possible could read our content and see our content. And Facebook told the government that they're going to block Canadian news if this bill becomes law, and they followed up on their promise, and they did it. So now we live in a world where you can't share any Village Media stories. You can't see any Village Media stories on your Facebook feed. I believe it says there's a message now if you go on there, something like, this is due to Canadian legislation.
Right, yeah.
That we can't see it. I have to say, as an editor here, who, we're always watching our traffic and watching, not traffic so to speak, but just watching what people are reading and what,
Yep.
to see that stories are getting shared 0 times is wild to me, because I keep thinking, this is a story. When we publish a particular story, we think, this is going to be one that really resonates with people. It's going to be shared a lot of times, and nobody's sharing it. And I have to be honest, there's a lot of things I think about with this, and we're watching closely for the time where people can still come to our sites and read our news. We haven't gone anywhere. We're still there, and we're still as committed as ever to local journalism. But what about the story of, the missing kid who they gets shared thousands of times? Our journalism gets shared thousands of times on Facebook, and people use that, and it might be the thing that helps find that kid. Or if there's a natural disaster in one of our communities, a tornado, a massive snowstorm where people are in danger. It's just going to be as if our reporting doesn't exist on Facebook. Again, it's going to exist on our sites, but it's not going to exist there. And a lot of people do go and get their news there.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to point out, and I know we've mentioned this in the past, the government's claim was that big tech was stealing our content. Mm-hmm. Nothing could be further from the truth. Mm-hmm. In fact, we were putting our content
for sure
happily on those platforms.
And it's safe to say, our own CEO said this many times, that Facebook was a key to our success, right? It was how we launched new markets. We would reach out to people in those communities through Facebook saying, hey, look at us, follow us, read our stories. We posted every single article on Facebook because we knew that it would increase our readership. It would put our stories in front of more eyes, right? And it was a big part of the way we did business. But we're not sitting here shaking in our boots. We have a lot of great things in the works right now that are going to help us continue to deliver the great quality local journalism that we do. So certainly we're not here, whining and crying about what's happening. We think it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's a stupid law, and it's not going to benefit. It's going to do way more harm to Canadian journalism than it is going to help it than it will to help it. And I think we're in a great position to keep delivering the news that we do, but we're not going to sit here and say that we're trying to look at the good things that are happening, the positive things that are happening in our company, and there's a lot of good things in the works.
Damn right there is. Face blocked.
Face blocked.
I love that.
Yes.
Your second favorite F word. As we shift to the first word.
That's my third one.
The first word to Frisco.
And that's my fourth one.
See, we could do this all day long.
All day long.
Let's go to Guelph today, and a great reporter down there, Taylor Pace, who's recently posted a story about a building that has been sold that housed some residents, largely on ODSP, and they're faced now with eviction and, sadly, no place to live.
Yeah, and you nailed it right there. You explained the whole story, and this is exactly the kind of things we do with community journalism, with local journalism. We keep an eye on this. Before I get into the story, I think that we should rename this segment to What You Didn't See on Facebook this week, right?
Exactly.
So Taylor Pace is, covering this story about a building that, again, housed mostly people on ODSP, lower income individuals, and now this building's been sold, and they've been given eviction notices. Some have been given a small buyout. And a lot of them are nervous. I believe it's September that the buildings has to be empty.
September, yeah.
And they don't know where they're going to go. And we keep talking about the housing crisis in this province. We're going to talk about it today as part of the Greenbelt discussion we're going to have later with the team of the Trillium. But this is one of those stories where I always say, imagine we weren't there to keep an eye on this stuff and to tell people what's happening. They just wouldn't know about it.
They wouldn't. Interesting side note on Taylor's story. The ODSP recipients receive between $560 and just over $1,000 a month for a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, respectively. Mm-hmm. In July, the average price of a 1-bedroom apartment in Guelph, $2,023.
That is crazy.
It's wild.
It is wild.
Okay, to Timmins, and a large number of international students there had offer letters. Now they've been revoked.
Yeah, this is a crazy story, right? Yeah. I think it's still developing. I believe we're having some other colleges stepping in to help, but basically these are international students who were coming to Timmins to go to college there. They had all their acceptance letters in place, and then boom, they're told, well, that's not valid anymore. I believe they were overbooked, or there was too many people they accepted. Right. And again, a story that we need to be reporting on, because this is a college in one of our communities. This is people who are, their whole life's going to change. They're coming from the other side of the world to go to college here. They've been accepted. They think they're coming, and then they get here, and all of a sudden they're told they don't have a spot, or they're on their way here. I believe it's a college in Toronto has agreed to step in and take some of these students. So it's still a developing story, but definitely one that we've done a great job covering at Timmins today.
And to Barrie, where a former doctor is trying to regain his former life as a doctor.
Yeah, this story blew my mind. This is Marge Bruneman's piece, and I remember reading about this doctor. I'm not sure if I can pronounce his name right, Dr. Daryl Gebian. He was convicted. He was basically prescribing himself opioids and was convicted and sent to jail. He really kind of hit rock bottom, as he says it, right? And he's kind of working his way back into the old life he had. As he said, he lost it all. He lost his family, his house on the lake, a prestigious job as an emergency room doctor. Pleaded guilty to forging medical prescriptions and trafficking in fentanyl by allowing others to keep fentanyl patches that he prescribed. Mm-hmm. So apparently he's now working, let me get this right, he's working as a walk-in doctor at a primary care clinic in Thornhill. He can't prescribe opioids or controlled substances. He's working under the supervision of another doctor, but he's slowly kind of, 7 years after that conviction, kind of getting his life back. So it's one of those stories where we all read about, his conviction, and it was in the news. I believe it was all over it was national news at the time. And this guy is trying to get his life back on track, and I guess you can't help but wish him the best.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's nice to see that we're telling these kind of stories as well.
Good for him, and we wish him nothing but the best. The first word to Frisco. All right, to today's show on Inside the Village. The only political story that people are talking about in the province in the last several weeks surrounds the auditor-general's damaging report where the Ford government and the Greenbelt is concerned.
Yeah, this is a huge story. That's the one that was making headlines all over the province. The auditor-general spent months looking into how certain parcels of the Greenbelt were removed, if certain people were given unfair advantages, and heads up on the fact that this was going to get done. And if you love politics, this was a hugely damaging report, to something that people who are followed very closely. So we're going to talk to two of the best people who know this story better, as well as anyone, if not better. Jessica Smith-Cross, the editor-in-chief of our site at Queen's Park, the Trillium, and Aidan Chamandy, one of our great reporters there. So I'm really looking forward to this chat.
All right, and we will do that next when Inside the Village returns right after this.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to Inside the Village. I'm Scott Sexsmith alongside Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief here at Village Media. The only political story that people in the province are talking about these days, of course, is the Greenbelt and the recent auditor-general's damaging report that came out. Nobody better to talk about the Greenbelt than Jessica Smith-Cross and Aidan Chamandy from the Trillium. Guys, thanks for doing this. Welcome to Inside the Village. Good to have you as always.
Thanks for having us on.
Aidan, let's start with you if we can. Break it down and maybe for our audience that maybe isn't that familiar with the Greenbelt, what is it?
It's a pretty simple concept. It was brought in about 20 years ago, around 2005, to largely control sprawl in southeastern or southwestern Ontario, the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, and protect some of the prime agricultural land that we are blessed with in this province. And that's kind of the overall concept of the Greenbelt.
And is there legislation protecting it that doesn't allow the government to change that?
There's legislation called the Greenbelt Act that does kind of form the overall contours of the plan. It's been adjusted a couple times. Once there was a process started in 2015, culminated in 2017 that saw some boundary changes, but largely the overall contours of the Greenbelt have been the same since 2005.
So you are allowed to tweak with it, and the previous Liberal government did do that, correct?
Yeah, there's a 10-year review process built into the plan. So brought in 2005, that initial review process started in 2015, finished in 2017, and now this process is quite a bit different from what the original architects of the plan had envisioned and put in the legislation.
For sure. Maybe Jessica, you can help us understand that. When the Ford government came into power, what was their thoughts about the Greenbelt? What did they do?
That's been quite an issue recently. When Doug Ford was first in his first campaign, and a video came out of him talking to some developers promising to open up land from the Greenbelt for developers. After that became public and there was some outcry, he promised not to touch the Greenbelt very adamantly and did not do so throughout his first term in office. But things changed after their second election victory in 2022.
And so what did change? How much did they actually go and decide to take out of the Greenbelt?
So we've learned so many more details about how this changed and what happened this week because the auditor-general, Bonnie Lysyk, looked into it and got a hold of a whole bunch of documents and interviews and sort of laid it out for us. So what we learned is that when the government was reelected in 2022, the Premier's mandate letter for the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, asked him to take a look at the Greenbelt and about processes to open it up. Mm-hmm. It didn't say do exactly what was done, but that was on the table at that point.
And the reason to open it up is because of housing, right? The Ford government's saying we need more housing. We have a massive shortage in Ontario. That was the idea, right?
Yep. The government's committed to building at least 1.5 million new homes over 10 years, which folks are now saying is the minimum Ontario needs to keep up with population growth.
So how did that process, and again, we've learned so much because of what the Auditor General said, but is there, I guess what I'm trying to understand for the average person is, what's the process they have to go through to do that like they did 10 years ago? Do they have to form a committee of some kind? How do they go about deciding how you take out land from the Greenbelt?
Yeah, so just to give you an idea of how that 2015 to 2017 process played out, it was a huge public consultation. It ended with about 30,000 acres being added and about 370 or so being removed. But people were brought in from all over: municipalities, developers, Indigenous communities, agricultural stakeholders, and it really was a public process, which kind of stands in marked contrast to what we have seen play out with this latest change.
Yeah, to help explain that, this was sort of done in reverse. So the government surprised us all this fall by announcing that they were going to take out certain parcels of land from the Greenbelt for development, 7,400 acres. And those parcels were chosen by the government first. They then consulted on it, but then didn't change the plan at all. And so what we learned through the Auditor General's report this week is how those parcels of land were actually chosen. We'd been told by the government all along that this was an independent process that was run by civil servants. There was nothing political about it. That turned out to be not so much the case.
So they're going to take out 7,400 acres, and this is one of the many dumb questions I have. But is the Greenbelt completely, some of it privately owned and some of it is Crown land, or how does that work?
That's right. The land is, I think, primarily privately owned. Some of it, I believe, is not. There are towns in the Greenbelt. There are river valleys. Most of it is agricultural. There's some of the land that has been added has been river valleys and beds to include that into the protected swaths of land. But all of the parts of the Greenbelt that were removed are privately owned. It's privately owned.
And just to be clear, so they didn't announce that they're going to remove 7,400 acres. This is what we're learning now. So how did this process unfold, Jessica?
So what happened is the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Steve Clark, got a new chief of staff. And that new chief of staff, when he started, was told to take a look at how land could be removed from the Greenbelt for development. He talked to civil servants about two different processes. They could do a big open review, or they could choose some land and go from there. He decided to choose some land and go from there. What the auditor found is that he assembled a group of civil servants, signed them all to a confidentiality agreement, and gave them 3 weeks to review land that should be taken from the Greenbelt. But the land that they were looking at within that 3 weeks was overwhelmingly parcels of land that he told them to look at. And the land that he told them to look at had been suggested by the developers, by the owners of that land, who wanted it removed from the Greenbelt. He asked the civil servants to look to add more parcels of it, but because they gave them only 3 weeks and he made them sign a confidentiality agreement, that meant they couldn't get information from municipalities, etc. They actually only came up with one more parcel of land. And they had the information that they needed for that because there had been litigation with the owner of that land who wanted it removed from the Greenbelt.
How many developers are we talking about, Jessica?
Aidan, do you know off the top how many? It's 15 parcels of land.
Yeah,
some repeated developers in there.
There are some repeated developers. Overall, during the whole process, there were 22 sites proposed, but only 15 got removed. But it's not 15 individual landowners. There are several repeats.
So for you guys, as you read the Auditor General's report, what was the shocker for you? I mean, I think as journalists at Queen's Park, I mean, obviously you're listening to, you know, all kinds of different things, and you'll read a report that would shock you in a way that wouldn't shock the average person. What did you take out of that? What was the thing that blew you away?
It's the timeline, and that's the stuff that's hardest to explain, in a casual conversation. But I'll do my best here. Right. So the AG, she sort of painted a picture about how this sort of happened over the fall. In mid-September, this chief of staff went to a building industry dinner. At that dinner, he sat with a couple of developers. They gave him some information packages on 3 pieces of land they wanted removed from the Greenbelt. The next day, one of those developers closed a deal for some of that land for $80 million. Jeez. Now, it wasn't all Greenbelt land, but it had a part of it that he wanted removed from the Greenbelt that ultimately was. The day after that, this chief of staff to the housing minister told the civil servants what he wanted to do was go land specific rather than look at the whole Greenbelt and go from there to look at parcels. Then the Auditor General also talked about how a little later on that month, there was the Premier's daughter's wedding. One of the developers who had land removed from the Greenbelt was there. And 2 days after the wedding, a lawyer representing him emailed that chief of staff asking for a parcel of his land to be removed from the Greenbelt. And in the subsequent days, emailed about 2 other parcels this developer was connected with. All of these parcels that I'm mentioning were part of the land that the chief of staff gave to the civil servants to evaluate and that were subsequently removed from the Greenbelt. So overall, when it comes together as this narrative, it really tells this story about how people who have access to important players in the Ford government seem to get, at least some of the time, what they want. And it is very profitable for them. The AG consulted with MPAC, the group that does land value assessments in Ontario, and found that they think the land uplift value for all the parcels removed was more than $8 billion.
Wow, that is unbelievable.
And that was just in 2016 numbers. Obviously 2023 now, property value has changed quite a bit in Ontario. So, we're looking at, the AG explicitly said that we are looking at a higher dollar figure than the $8.3 billion she initially announced.
Yeah. So many things strike me about that. And one of the things is that really sticks out for me is how much that vindicates the kind of reporting that you guys have done on, say, Doug Ford's daughter's wedding, and why that reporting is so important because of what you spoke to, Jessica, about how politics is all about access to power, right? Can you speak to that? I mean, that must feel vindicating for you guys that you did that kind of reporting.
Yeah, the story that the AG mentioned in her report, the guest list for the Premier's daughter's wedding, that's by our very own Charlie Pinkerton, who's on a vacation this week.
Well-earned.
Who said he could take a vacation? Nobody.
Did you approve that?
Nobody emailed me on that.
I'd say it's well-earned. But yeah, we do spend a lot of time going through political donations. These developers, by the way, are generous political donors. We spend a lot of time talking about this, who has access, who's lobbying, because we do find that it does reflect the way decisions are made in the province.
And sorry, Frisco, if I could just jump in to your earlier question about what surprised you most, like wholeheartedly agree with everything that Jess says, but just really want to underline these two developers who gave packages at this industry association dinner, coupled with the one whose lawyer later emailed the chief of staff. That's 92% of the land that's being removed from the Greenbelt. So obviously the vast majority. And another thing that really stuck out to me as surprising is when the government outlined their plans for the Greenbelt removal last November, they said, okay, we want 50,000 homes built on this land. We need substantial progress to be made on the infrastructure and the approvals, building homes by 2025, or we're going to start putting these lands back into the Greenbelt. And one thing that the AG found is that there's essentially a not very well thought out process around how are we going to get the developers to pay for this? How many homes are going to be built? What are the exact timelines? Like it really underlines just how much work went into a 3-week process and how much is kind of left by the wayside.
That's wild.
Well, I'm just curious with this kind of a damaging report and the level of obvious evidence. The deniability factor is just outrageous that the Premier and the Housing Minister can stand and just say that everything's fine, everything's above board. It just that's funny math.
You know, the way the Premier handled it, and has been handling it, is to say that the ends have justified the means here. Everyone knows that there's a housing affordability issue in the province. And so he's saying that, you know, this process was flawed, but we need to tackle this, and I'm the champion for the housing crisis. Critics would argue that they didn't need to do this, that there isn't actually a connection between the way they handled this and solving the housing crisis. But that is the story. That is the way he's explaining it. The process was flawed, but we need to move forward.
Yeah, I believe Liberal interim leader John Fraser said there's, I think it was no way on God's green earth that the Premier and the Housing Minister didn't know what was going on. And there's a quote here from the AG's report. So the Chief of Staff substantially controlled and directed the process, and the Deputy Minister believed that the Chief of Staff was working under the authority of the Housing Minister and the Premier's office. So one of the top civil servants in the Housing Ministry was kind of left out of the loop. And considering how often deputy ministers, and chief of staffs interact on a daily basis, it is quite shocking.
I guess the other question that always fascinates me with what we do as journalists is how much does this resonate with the public? It shocked us. It shocked the journalists who reported on it. It shocks anyone who follows Queen's Park really closely. How has this resonated with the general public? Do they care?
It's hard to tell, right? When we talk to people, most of the time we're talking to highly involved people. We don't spend as much time as we should just walking down the street saying, hey, have you heard of this? And what do you know? And what do you think? I do think that Ontarians understand the Greenbelt. A lot of them appreciate it. When Doug Ford first reversed his promise to open it up to developers, I think it's because they felt and understood that the outcry was real. But I also believe that people do see a housing affordability crisis and a problem, and if that remains the focus and the details otherwise are lost, I can see that being a persuasive argument.
And it seems like that's what the Ford government's banking on, right? They're gonna, that's their message to people, right?
There was a at the post AG report press conference with Housing Minister Steve Clark and the Premier, there was one. The Premier gave one answer where he said, "Well, that's your message, and we're going to keep repeating ours, being that this is necessary to build housing."
Well, speaking of messages, has anyone called the OPP, or has anyone passed this information on to the police, as far as you know?
Yes. The OPP are reviewing the matter. They have been for months now. And the province's integrity commissioner is as well. And that's actually, it doesn't sound that interesting, but it's more interesting than it sounds. This is a retired judge who has experience leading inquiries and investigations, who has the same ability to sort of compel documents and interviews with people. And instead of looking at more of the sort of value for money, the policy process, which was the AG's focus, his focus is actually ethical wrongdoing. So he has opened an investigation into Minister Clark. There's one that is held into abeyance related to Doug Ford and the wedding and the Stag and Doe. He's waiting to start that until he finishes the Greenbelt one with Minister Clark. And he also has been asked to investigate the behavior of the Chief of Staff. And he also has responsibility for lobbyists who are involved in this as well. So we're waiting to see what he says about the investigation he has launched on Minister Clark and whatever else may follow.
Mm-hmm. Do we know what the timeline is on that, Jess?
His timeline is his timeline.
Yeah.
And just if I can jump in there quick, the integrity commissioner, kind of like the auditor-general, doesn't really have a lot of power to punish someone. You can ban someone from lobbying. There can be a small fine, but the document disclosure stuff, everything that we've seen from the AG report, there can be extensive. This can be an extensive fact-finding mission where we find out even more than the AG found.
Has anyone lost their job because of this yet?
No.
So none of the characters involved that you've discussed, they're still working?
The Chief of Staff is still working, which frankly surprised me. Even the minister, I thought there might be some consequences there. The thing you hear in politics a lot is either you were incompetent because you didn't know what was going on, or you're part of the problem. But that doesn't seem to have been an issue for Minister Clark in this case. At
that same press conference, both the Premier and Minister Clark were explicitly asked, full stop, does this guy still have a job? And they didn't answer directly. They just kind of said, "Oh, we're committed to ensuring this process." But I checked all the relevant websites just before coming on, and this individual in question is still listed as the Minister's Chief of Staff. So
wow. And what about the developers? Who are they, and has there been any fallout for them?
The developers' plans are proceeding as there's been no disruption to that. So the biggest site, it's the one in the Duffins Rouge Agricultural Preserve. It's called Cherrywood. It's TAC Developments. The Silvio de Gasperis is the principal there. He is also the one who sued the government over the Greenbelt plans back in 2005, trying to stop it. He has a lot of Greenbelt land and has for some time. The developer behind the piece that I mentioned that had been sold right as this was happening for $80 million. His name is Michael Rice. It's Green Lane Bathurst Limited Partnership that owns that, and those plans are proceeding as well.
So
those two are the ones who had sued the auditor-general about a month ago, maybe a little bit longer, because they had been summoned by her, and they essentially said we're not talking. So there's a lot of documents, there's a lot of interviews that made up the contents of this report, but neither of those two spoke to her.
And have they spoken publicly at all? Put out a statement of any kind?
No,
not that I've seen.
Guys, is there anything else where the Greenbelt is concerned that we haven't touched on that you'd like us to today?
Well, Jess mentioned the forthcoming Integrity Commissioner report. Also a potential OPP investigation. Another thing that is kind of looming as a little Damocles over this is the federal government's potential study of the Rouge Park, which is the largest urban park in Canada, I believe, maybe in the world. And the federal environment minister is concerned that development in the Greenbelt could harm protected species that live in this area. And the federal government actually might have power to block development if any of these specific developments would adversely affect federal species that are protected. So the terms of reference of that study were recently settled upon. And I mean, any day now, really, the people who are actually going to conduct that study are expected to be named. So there's the potential OPP investigation. integrity commissioner investigation and whatever the heck the federal government is going to do here.
All right. Lots of interesting times ahead where the Greenbelt is concerned. Jessica Smith-Cross and Aidan Chamandy from the Trillium, thanks for doing this today. Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
For the latest in in-depth features and enterprise journalism from your local writers at Village Media, be sure to check out The Big Read. The Big Read. It's the full story behind the headlines. Look for The Big Read on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back to wrap on another episode of Inside the Village. Derek Frisco and Scott in the studio. Wow, what a conversation with Aidan and Jess.
I love that conversation because I can tell you, as a journalist, I've been a journalist for a long time, and I've covered a ton of stories where the release of a major report is the climax. Well, not the climax, but it's a huge part of the story. Whether it's an auditor-general's report or an investigator's report, or I'm trying to think. There's so many different examples, right? And it's a big, long report, and they've had access that sometimes a journalist can't get to because they can subpoena documents, things like that. And it's like a huge eye-opener for someone who's like them, who's covered the story for a long time. And then you had to have this official report that lays out all these other new details. And just listening to Jessica, for example, talk about, the narrative of how then this guy handed this and this guy, and then the lawyer sends this email. It honestly gave me chills because that's what I love about this business. It's telling those stories and then really drilling down as deep as you can possibly go, right? And these kind of reports will give you those details. So they just did an amazing job of explaining it to someone who has heard the word Greenbelt, but might not really know what this is all about. And so that's what I love about our podcast. We can have conversations like this, and I hopefully people will come away from it understanding a lot more than they did before.
Yeah, sitting here listening to her dissect, the order of events and things that came out in the AG's report, it's shocking that all of this evidence exists, yet nothing criminal to this point has happened.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to make a prediction, but I'm for sure there are some police officers looking at this information right now. There's whether there's ever any charges laid, who knows? But I mean, it kind of has all the elements of what the police would look into. Again, whether that comes of anything, I don't know. But just, I think the other fascinating thing for me too is just the way politics maybe has evolved a little bit in the years that I've been involved in covering politics or covering the news, I guess, is, this is the kind of story that I feel like 20 years ago, someone would have wore that, like someone would have resigned, someone would have had to fall on their sword.
Absolutely.
But
taking one for the team.
Yeah, taking one for the team. But now the attitude is, no, you got it all backwards. We did this because we're in an emergency. We need more housing. Yeah. And they're going to play that tune. And to be fair, and to be honest, Doug Ford's Conservatives wiped it at the last election. They wiped everybody, right?
Majority.
So, a huge majority. Yeah. There was no real opposition to that. I think they won more seats than before. And these are where people were upset about things like the Bradford bypass, for example.
Yep.
They won a huge majority. So I'm sure that they're sitting in the back rooms thinking, we can weather this storm. This doesn't resonate with enough people. The people aren't invested in the full story of what happened here. And I think we can kind of weather this storm. And whether they can or not, I don't know. But it'll be interesting to see how that works.
It's funny. I almost hate to draw this comparison, but I look at Trump and what he's gone through and what he's going through, and the level of deniability. No, we didn't do that. I didn't do that. Yet all this evidence.
I know.
And then you look at what's happening with the Ford government. There's a couple of similarities.
But doesn't that make you think too? Like Trump was his fourth indictment filed the other day.
Something just happened in Georgia. He just got indicted
another day. So 4 indictments, right? And he's still going to run for president. This is what I'm saying is what we used to think of was a scandal.
Yeah,
doesn't, not that this isn't scandalous, I'm not saying that, but what we used to think of as a scandal 20 years ago doesn't really resonate as a scandal today when you have a presidential candidate or a former president who's now 4 indictments or whatever. So I'm not saying that what the Auditor General's report is not hugely devastating to the government and it's certainly eye-opening to the public. But the real question, as it always is with politics, is does it stick? Does it resonate with the voter?
Well,
do people care?
And I haven't checked Trump's latest polling numbers, but I bet you he's not in last. And I bet you if you looked at Ford's level of popularity.
For sure. But what I will say is this, is one of the huge lessons from this is the importance of journalism and why we love this craft so much, why we're so passionate about the work that we do. Because for sure there was a segment of people out there talking about Charlie Pinkerton's reporting on the wedding, for example, who wonder, well, why is that? Why are you reporting on that? Why did we care who's sitting at Doug Ford's daughter's wedding? Well, this is why we care, because it's about access to power. And to think that the auditor-general used that reporting as part of her evidence and part of the report that she did shows why we need to be shining a light on these things. And I mean, I've said it a million times. I love the work we do at Village. I'm super proud of everybody, and I'm super duper proud of the work that we do at the Trillium. I mean, it's just leading the way on provincial political reporting. And to have the talent that we have there, to have that watchdog element at Queen's Park is just amazing. It's amazing for us as a company. It's amazing for the readers who are reading those pieces. And I just think I love when it validates the work that we do. And I could talk all day about journalism, but I'm really proud of that team, and they should be proud of themselves.
And we should also mention, speaking of podcasts, that Aidan Chamandy, who we just had on, of course, with Jess, hosts a great podcast called The Trill. You can find it wherever you get your favorite podcasts, or, of course, at thetrillium.ca. You can check it out and subscribe there. It's some good stuff.
Absolutely. It's a great podcast.
And speaking of a great podcast, at least we think, we'll be back next week. But in the meantime, itv@villagemedia.ca is where you can find us 24/7, of course, across the Village Media Network, wherever you get your favorite podcast, just like The Trill, and at insidethevillage.ca. For Derek Turner, executive producer here at ITV, Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Enjoy the rest of your week and weekend. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.